The third assessment report from OACI, the Ohio Agriculture Conservation Initiative, has been released for the Scioto watershed. Joined by an esteemed group of panelists to talk about what we found in these new data points from the Scioto watershed. Joining us from The Ohio State University, Dr. John Fulton to my far left. Chris Schwartz is chairman of OACI to my left, and to my right, Jordan Haywisher, Director of Water Quality and Research with the Ohio Farm Bureau, and I'm Ty Higgins with Ohio Farm Bureau. OACI, you may have heard of it, may have seen the logo or got some things in the mail from your local Soil and Water, the Ohio Agriculture Conservation Initiative, really in a collective group of all types, from agriculture to academia to conservation to environmental. Chris, tell us about OACI, why it was put together, and what we're here to accomplish.
Well, OACI was put together originally probably 5 or 6 years ago. We had a lot of groups that were working on water quality issues. We had the ag groups working one way, we had the environmental groups working on some other projects, and we weren't really working together as a cohesive unit. All those organizations came together, and then we blended in our educational, our institutions, and we're trying to make a real difference in water quality by working collaboratively.
These are groups that have never been at the same table before until we had that meeting in Ostrander in 2019. It was quite a moment, not just for agriculture, but for water quality across Ohio.
Absolutely. I mean, we traditionally sat across the table from some of our environmental groups in Ohio. We didn't look at the issues the same way. This brought us together on the same side. I'm still astounded this happens in Ohio. I go on other national boards, and those guys are like, hey, they're fighting against their environmental groups. We are working with our environmental groups, and I think that's why we're making better strides in Ohio than the rest of the Midwest.
Gotten a lot accomplished over the last 5 years, including, as I mentioned, the third assessment report looking at the Scioto watershed. When I say assessment report, Jordan, what am I talking about? What are we looking at, and what are we going to use this data for?
Yeah, it's a farm field assessment, so we're not gauging things across the whole farm, but we're strategically, spatially selecting farms and watersheds, farm fields and watersheds to take information down on different farming practices. And it really supplies us like a backbone of information for a lot of the science and modeling and conclusions that are being made about what farmers are doing or not doing around Ohio. And so when we work with a lot of our different partners that Chris said, or a university comes to us and says, oh, we think tillage is this much, or we think this is this much, we can actually give them real-time data to say, hey, in this area we think this is the percentage of this, and it really helps set a good standard and a good baseline for all the different funding mechanisms that are out there for our Ohio farmers. But also we're going to come back to those areas and compare how well H2 Ohio did, how well EQIP from USDA is doing on conservation practices, and that really helps us measure how successful are we with some of the program that we have in Ohio.
Dr. Fulton, how is this data collected? These watersheds are not tiny. There's a lot of data points to be had throughout these watersheds. Talk us through that process and how we get from point A to point B.
Yeah, so we are sampling at the HUC 8 level, so that's a watershed delineation. We basically, through GIS, will select all the counties that are in that HUC 8 and then sub-select only those fields that are in that particular HUC 8. Once we have all those fields selected, we basically go through a statistical process. We have consulted with the Iowa State University Statistician Center and developed this sampling strategy, and we basically spatially select fields. So if, say, a whole county versus a partial county, the whole county would have a little bit more fields involved in that sampling than a partial county. But the idea is they are randomly selected. Once those fields are randomly selected, we train soil and water districts in those counties, go through that process, and basically there's a list of questions on an individual field that's answered. That all gets aggregated. Okay, there is no identification of who is managing or owns that field at the end of this, but we aggregate all that and summarize all that data to identify what practices are being done within that watershed related to water quality.
As we go through the data for the Scioto watershed, it's important to note we're not comparing watershed to watershed. What we're doing is comparing the watershed's first assessment to the second and third we're going to do in the months and years down the road. And Jordan, that's an important piece because every watershed is going to be different. We talk about different farms across the road having different practices and different ideals. Certainly within different watersheds are going to be different ideas of how to protect water and nutrients.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is just about gathering information. Like we said, we're going to have this baseline. We don't really know what's good or bad necessarily. What level is acceptable. It's more about what's reality. Where these farm fields are at, and then making sure that there is progress made. But we don't really know what would be successful. We just know that we wouldn't want someone to get the number wrong or assume the wrong thing. And so, being able to communicate to the non-farming public, hey, here's where we're sitting at, and be able to communicate to the farmers as well to say, hey, here's how you kind of are sitting compared to your neighbors in your watershed. And it might help promote farmers to be like, okay, well, I'm not part of the 60 or 70% that are doing a certain practice. Maybe I should get on board. And I think that really helps with bringing all the farmers along in the right direction.
Also going to give us a baseline of, as Dr. Fulton mentioned, how programs like H2 Ohio are actually working at the farm level. Here are some of the key findings from the Scioto Watershed Assessment Report from OACI. Approximately 62% of the field surveyed currently enrolled in a cost-share conservation program, including both state and federal level programs. Chris, your thoughts on that particular number?
I think that's a pretty high number. Higher than I would have expected. I think that's great, especially because, if we go north into my area, we have the H2 Ohio presence. So that's without H2 Ohio. I just think as H2 Ohio blows into the rest of the state, that should go up. And I don't want people to think that only 62% of the farms are doing conservation, because we're picking up in our survey the farmers that are doing stuff voluntarily outside of a program. And those are things that haven't been accounted for until we did this survey.
Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good jumping off point, right? We keep talking about it's a baseline, and so when we know, hey, this Huck 8 was influenced by these different programs, we know that there's a pretty good chance that those are attributed to having some influence from H2 Ohio, EQIP, et cetera. And so I think it's just nice to know that we can put some success on those programs, especially as we come back, and that number is going to be most likely higher.
Dr. Fulton gets excited when I talk about soil testing and VRT and all the things that go into the new technology being used in agriculture. And Dr. Fulton, the assessment found most farmers were testing their soil. 76% of the survey fields being sampled at least once every 4 years. The vast majority of soil samples at 91% completed using precision agriculture via grid or zone methods. That's got to be exciting to you and your team.
Well, and I think it's higher than we expected when we went into this. But when we look at not only the soil sampling coupled with folks that are actually doing variable rate, it's pretty impressive. And like Chris said, some of those are voluntarily doing it. They're not locked into a certain program and getting cost share on it. They're voluntarily doing some of these practices.
VRT also important as far as phosphorus applied goes. Approximately 64% of fields surveyed had phosphorus applied using variable rate technology. 24% of fields had nitrogen applied using VRT. We're seeing VRT on more and more farms every single year, Dr. Fulton.
Absolutely, and those numbers just seem to, increase each year. So I expect as we collect more data that we'll obviously see those numbers rise, slowly over the years.
Why are we seeing that rise in VRT? New technologies are not inexpensive. Agriculture has seen kind of a downhill slide, economically speaking, yet we're still seeing farmers wanting to do more and do better.
Well, I think, the precision part of it is growing greatly, but it's all economics. It's making people money. I think you can show by that our retailers and ag community have embraced that too, because a lot of those farmers are doing that through their retailer. So their retailer is not going to offer that service unless it's beneficial to their customers. So I think that's going to grow, because the more guys do it, they realize that economically the variable rate technology is the way to go.
Jordan oversees the Blanchard River demonstration farms through Ohio Farm Bureau, and these are things that you show off on those farms. What are the reactions you get from farmers when they see this type of technology in use?
Yeah, I mean, I think the farmer really appreciates data. They love the information, and so anytime they can get a printout of, hey, this is how, maybe they didn't even use less fertilizer in their field, but it's put in the right place, and so they just want to know that they're using it as efficiently as possible, because it's a business. They want to have good economics, and they're just not going to waste nutrients. And I think that's the biggest message. Through some of the information through Ohio State, farmers have put down 33% less fertilizer since 1995, and that's because of some of these technologies and education on how they can utilize those nutrients. So I think the farmers love that information, they love the data, they love to know that, hey, I'm utilizing every pound of that nutrients I can.
The next data point, very enticing for my folks from Soil and Water, 77% of fields either no-tilled or minimally tilled. That's important for conservation, obviously, but we've had a drought here in 2024, and those practices certainly help with that water management as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think everybody's going to agree that a no-till field or something with some residue is going to hold some more moisture. I'm excited that 77% on that obviously we would like to see 100%. In the water quality area, our number one enemy is erosion. If we lose that soil, you're losing all the nutrients. So that's something that's high. I would wish it would be higher. I think it's going to get to be higher.
60% of farmland assessed owned by the farmer, 40% was in a lease. Jordan, why is that data point so important?
Yeah, I mean, farmers have some uncomfortability about putting conservation practices on farm that they don't own. They're maybe not sure they're going to farm it for years to come. A lot of conservation pays off long term. And so when they are, expected to pay thousands of dollars to do certain things, they want to make sure that they're going to be the ones that reap that benefit. And I think, we need to do more education on the non-farmer landowner side to understand the type of partnerships you need to have with your farmer, long-term leases, cost share for conservation and for water management, things that, we see probably more when maybe an ex-farmer is the landowner, but maybe if you're generations away, they may not understand the type of relationship you should have with your farmer, and it shouldn't be fly-by-night. It shouldn't be the highest bidder. It should be the person who is going to commit to making that land as best as possible and be as productive and as efficient as possible. And I think if we can get more non-farmer landowners to think like that, then conservation is going to be a lot higher adoption rate on those farm fields.
Dr. Fulton, that 60-40 split, what do you make of that? And the landscape of agriculture is changing. Do you see that number skewing one way or the other?
Well, it's definitely, it seems like 50-50-ish in all of our surveys. And I don't know that I'm going to see that change, but I do think we got to recognize, as Jordan put, there's quite a bit of this land's being leased, and even the landlords or landowners may put stipulations on the farmer, and so they may be hands tied to do certain practices just because the landowner. So I guess I take away is not only is it important to be talking to our farmers, but we got to be educating our landowners too about the value of some of these practices as well.
Yeah, we're hearing more and more about farmland changing hands, and that dynamic is going to be continuing on for many, many years to come. Farm familiarity comes into play here. 92% of the fields surveyed in this assessment report were managed by the farmer for 3 years or longer, 8% being farmed less than 3 years. Why did we ask that question, Chris Schwartz?
Well, it goes back to Jordan's comment that a lot of our practices don't pay off just in 1 year. They take 2 or 3 years. I think that's a great number because it shows our people that they can go out and talk to most of the farmers. 92% of them are on ground that they have a long tenure. I mean, our game is the long game. We're not into year-to-year results. So that's really important to us because, the feeling around is that we have lots of farms changing hand every year and we'll never get conservation on that. But it's really less than 8%. So that's a positive for our program.
This last number surprised me, and it really shouldn't because of the way agriculture is changing, but 85% of fields surveyed in this assessment report utilize fertilizer retailers and crop consultants. What did that number mean to you? It seems like, back in the 80s, everybody kind of did their own thing, and now they're relying on these consultants to help them out.
Yeah, I mean, it shows that the farmers are accepting of other professionals to help them in that world. I mean, obviously, like we talked about, if you make your nutrient program more efficient, you're going to make more money. It's better for your business. Less nutrients that are potentially at risk to come off the field. And I think it just shows that our farmers are malleable. They're signing up for new programs at a very high rate. They're accepting help from other professionals, and obviously a lot of those are paid services, but they know they're getting that value back in good soil testing, frequent soil testing, the right zoner grid sample, getting a VRT program, and all that is accumulated into more efficiency on the field and more money in their pocket in the long run.
Yeah, Dr. Fulton, it opens the door for more acres to have that technology when you have these consultants and these applicators and retailers come in and do it for you.
Absolutely, and just to throw in, if you look at the surveyed numbers outside of our survey, 90+% of our service providers provide these kind of precision services, and so they're there to help. And so that is just just goes to show that we constantly see more increase, but the adoption. But I think the important thing I was going to mention in all this is that these service providers are there to help, not only help the farmers, but they're helping them report on some of these programs too. It's a farm business, Ty, and there's a lot of things that go into farming, and it's like any business, you got to have multiple core competencies, and so they are seeking help in some of these areas, including agronomic consulting.
You can see all the results from this assessment report online at ohioaci.org. Before we wrap up, I want to work our way down the line here and just get your biggest takeaway from this assessment report for the Scioto watershed, Dr. Fulton.
Well, I think it, for this particular one, I think there was quite a bit of surprises that we are seeing practices adopted voluntarily, not just within the programs. And so I thought that's a real perk to show that the farmers are taking this seriously. They're making a business out of it, but they're moving forward both on the side of trying to make money, but doing the right thing environmentally.
Chris, how surprised are you that the further we move to the south, the numbers really aren't changing that much?
Yeah, I'm very surprised by that. I thought we've had a lot of emphasis up north in the original 24 counties on H2 Ohio, and that the adoption rates as we move south would be significantly less. They were maybe a little less, but not a lot. So that shows me that farmers are embracing the economics and the agronomics of precision agriculture. I think that ultimately leads to way better water quality.
Jordan, your takeaway?
Yeah, I think it shows information transfer, right? In past generations or past decades, you'd have to wait for some extension meeting or your annual soil and water meeting or some way that you could get in front of somebody who is doing a certain practice. But you can text your fellow farmer, you can talk to them on the phone, Twitter, you can connect on social media with a farmer who's farming in Iowa and Nebraska who maybe is on step 4 of a practice that you're just on step 0, and they can help you kind of get through that. And so I think the comfortability of some of these practices based off of what their fellow farmers are doing is really big, and that peer-to-peer interaction I think is really helping this information transfer. So even though our Northwest Ohio farmers have had a little bit more regulatory pressure and water quality pressure, some of that information is trickling out because they know it's helping their farms and being more efficient.
Again, you can find this data and find out more about OACI, the Ohio Agriculture Conservation Initiative, online at ohioaci.org. Jordan Haywisher is Director of Water Quality and Research with Ohio Farm Bureau. Chris Schwartz, Chairman of OACI, and Dr. Fulton with The Ohio State University. Really appreciate you all taking time to visit with us about this new assessment report. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.